So I also want to note, wherever we are today, we meet on Aboriginal land, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So many of you I know, but I am Talie Donovan. I'm the CEO of Domestic Violence New South Wales. And it's my great pleasure and honour to be here today. So I keep losing my notes, bear with me, there we go. So it's my great pleasure and honour to be here today to formally launch the Voices for Change report. And great to see so many of us here today, so many wonderful advocates, allies and friends, as I said. So the Voices for Change report, as Renata mentioned, was launched in July 2019 and ended in June 2020. This extensive, descriptive and considered report made 12 recommendations for future survivor advocacy projects and 6 recommendations for promoting survivor advocacy in Australia, all of which we will speak to today. The Voices for Change programme has been a huge asset to Domestic Violence New South Wales. We've learned so much from the process, built new networks, built on existing networks, and have been able to maintain trusted, strong, ongoing relationships through this important work. The report highlights the importance of lived expertise throughout policy and practice, and that will also come up today. In the 2 years since the project launched, there has been, as we know and we would have seen through media, an even greater shift in the inclusion of people with domestic and family violence lived expertise. For example, we saw this with the lived expertise panel headed up at the ANROS conference, which was fantastic this year. However, as we all know, there is still such a huge way to go to ensure victim survivor input is always included, is at the centre of consultation, and that it's valued and given the appropriate weight. Also, that the advocates are considered professionals in their own right and reimbursed and recognised for this time accordingly. This work also saw the crucial role media plays, as long as, and again something we all know, as long as it's considered, ethical and safe. High quality media reporting with survivors as part of a prevention framework can be powerful and is essential in telling stories. In my role, I'm asked daily to speak to the media about domestic violence. And I'm often asked by journalists, can I link them with victim survivors? Unfortunately, this isn't always safe physically, emotionally for people with lived expertise and who have experienced violence. But what was great about this project, and again, which we'll speak to today, were the supports we had that were funded, which included peer support, training and information for advocates to be able to tell their story in a way that was powerful yet safe. You can see from the Voices for Change report that the outcomes have been varied from the widespread of articles produced and the reach of speeches that were told at events and the personal impact of participating, which again, you will hear from directly from the advocates today, which I can't wait to hear. I can't wait to hear what they've got to tell us. And I mean, you'll see from the report just how much learning has come from this in terms of recommendations and insights. So finally and importantly, our thank yous. First and foremost, I'd like to thank and acknowledge each and every single one of the advocates who were involved in our programme. Your resilience, passion and dedication to creating change has been incredible and inspiring. It has been a pleasure to meet you and work alongside you in my role at DVNSW, and many of you I got to meet just as I came in last. Like I said, it's been nothing but an honour and great to learn alongside you. Other thank yous also include the countless partners who have helped this project come to life. Our Watch, who provided seed funding for the project. Without this funding, our project wouldn't have started or been led under the vital primary prevention approach. CBA, Commonwealth Bank, who provided the 1 year's funding for the project. The results of this funding will speak for itself today, and we're so glad to have you attending. The Illawarra Women's Health Centre and ACON, who partnered to deliver the training in Illawarra. And for the LGBTQ participants, we thank you. Independent researchers, Corina Backhouse, Cherie Toivonen, and Dr. Leticia Funston, who drafted this report. And thank you so much for your work. We know there's been lots of back and forth with us, and we're really pleased with the outcome. Former Domestic Violence CEO, huge thanks. Charlotte Davies, Claire Pettigrew, Tracy Spicer, all of the members of the project steering committee, our interns, Sid and Marion, Claire Say, who designed the beautiful report you will see and has done some incredible work for DVNSW through the comms outlets, And finally, all the journalists and organisations who work with us and wanted to make sure those stories were ethical, safe and considered. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. Now moving on to Jane.
Hi everyone, I'm very grateful to be here. Just bear with me while I bring my speech up because I'm just terrible at speaking off the top of my head. So I had to put something together to make it easier to flow through the information. In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And I acknowledge the Bundjalung people in my current area and the Minjungbal people in South Tweed Heads. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend the respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. I am greatly appreciative to be here as part of this report and process of sharing outcomes of experience. And as the report states, it has achieved some sizable measurable goals for all 18 of us who participated in the process. It has been an absolute privilege to be part of this program, one that will hopefully move on to the development of a peak body and the professional management of lived experience skill. For me, I see this project as pivoting the management of abuse through transformational innovation, through our input, through lived experience. I learned incredibly from the experience of others, and that's from someone with lived experience as well. That sharing is an incredible part of this process. I was a member of the very first group trained in 2018 and linked in to what is an international movement to better manage the impacts of vulnerable people. International academic papers have been well documented the value of lived experience. Research papers in 2006 by Davidson, Assad and Cream in 2016, Glover and Hodges in 2017 highlight the benefits with the key aim of exploring ways of mastering vulnerability. In fact, Mission Australia have their own lived experience framework. Building on this movement, Voices for Change, through the vision of the Luke Batty Foundation and Our Watch and partnering individuals, have helped to build an important bridge to the better management of issues of domestic abuse. New South Wales Voices for Change was the first lived experience project of DV New South Wales aimed at reducing and preventing domestic, family and sexual violence through media advocacy. And the objectives of the project was to empower and support individuals and sexuality and gender diverse people, to support media in accurately reporting. And we all know that some of those key media labels, weren't accurate in the way they were managing gender inequality and rigid gender stereotypes. And to contribute to changing behaviours and community attitudes about violence against women and sexuality and gender diverse people. This program served to caution against generalisation of issues and also served as a reminder that lived experience can be valuable. In 2018, the DV New South Wales was one of 3 organisations in Australia to receive the funding, as was just mentioned. It was part of the National Media Engagement Program 2017-2019 and was part of the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children 2010 and 2022. The first group was trained in Sydney, of which I was a part of, and there was non-consecutive days, which I think is important in relation to this process because we went through reliving our experiences. So that segmented and split between the days was important. A second group, a regional group, came from the Illawarra, and a third specific group for LGBTIQA, through carefully managed and trusted relationships were built with journalists, television producers, politicians, government departments and writers. The DV New South Wales project team undertook significant care with us, and they were very conscious of trauma because that's what happens when you go through that process of training. They identified and managed the risks and safety for us as participants, and the planning and the development around the procedures to manage our legal, physical and emotional safety was also part of that training, and it was very important. One of the initial selection criteria for us was self-identifying that we were an appropriate stage of readiness and willing to speak publicly. Confirming that we were not engaged in current court matters, being over 18, so it was a bit hard for me, and living in New South Wales. We had as I mentioned, we had non-consecutive days of well-structured, objective-focused training. Media training was the most arduous, and I cannot explain how much Tracy Spicer gave us insights into being able to present our key messages. We were filmed, and then we got to see what our key messages looked like on film as part of that developed approach. We practice speech making. And we're delivering with the brilliant support and constant feedback of Renata and other people that were a part of this core group. In fact, I would say that the feedback process and that constant development was a key part of our success. And I'm really grateful to Renata for all the key information she gave us on a gradual basis and the ongoing learning as part of this process. This experience itself went on to allow me to learn a lot and to the sisters to create what's called the Sisters-in-Law project, of which I've now, with other lived experience people, been able to present to committees like the Coercive Control Committee. So in the end, the training that I had, I was able to share with others, then developed a core skill group for people then to go up and do more lived experience. But again, the biggest problem in this space is having funding. And I just need to flick back to the screen, just one moment. And what we had in that training is really important. So the process of understanding what was happening in relation to the materials from Our Watch that came through in the content of knowledge. So we looked at the Our Watch materials, we leveraged off the Our Watch materials. We understood the legal implications of what we were doing, and we were careful about telling our story. We looked at the process of change the story, which was important. But one of the biggest things was the collective discussion amongst ourselves as advocates to say, well, how we felt, and being aware of what worked for us and what didn't, and sharing that knowledge as part of that development was an important point. Again, I'd just like to thank DV New South Wales and Our Watch and all those associated and my team members for all their support. And I hand it back over to you, Renata.
Thank you so much, Jane. So incredible to hear from you, from your insights. And I hope for everyone that gave you a bit of a background about how the project worked and some of the, I guess, the supports and the frameworks that we set up to ensure that the advocates who were part of the program felt fully supported. Now I'm going to send you over to Synthia to give us a little bit of a personal insight about how the program was for her and some of her experiences as being part of it. Thanks, Synthia.
Thanks, Renata. So before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which I'm meeting on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So back in December 2018, just as I was about to submit my expression of interest for the Voices for Change program, I came across a YouTuber or entrepreneur named Evan Carmichael, who for me really articulated the essence of why I wanted to be part of this program. And Carmichael says that, you know, I think the why in what you do comes from pain. And I think that humans are good, and I'm on Team Human. And when you've gone through something painful, you just naturally want to make it easier for other people that are suffering that same thing. So in the initial stages of the program, I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I remember sitting across from, you know, these 10 brilliant women, you know, who were all survivors, you know, and as they started, you know, talking and presenting themselves, I was thinking, what have I gotten myself into, for starters? Because they were so knowledgeable. They spoke so eloquently, and whether it was, you know, disabilities and homelessness, whether it was, you know, family law, case management, domestic and family violence within an Indigenous setting, they had it all covered. They were powerful and they were polished, you know, in their own right, and they were subject matter experts. And I think that set the benchmark for the first cohort. And as my journey unfolded, I came to realize that I was there to represent the voices of children, because children's voices are often, you know, ignored, they're dismissed, they're not taken seriously. And children also need to be heard and respected. But one of the most important things for me that I've been able to, I guess, gain from Voices for Change is the profound degree of healing, because I think that when you want to do advocacy work, and when you have, I guess, that trauma background, you know, you've got to be somewhat willing, you know, to face your deepest, darkest fears, or you've got to be willing to somewhat, you know, go back into your past, and naturally people, you know, run away from their past, and so I think it takes a lot of, I guess, vulnerability and courage to be able to shine, you know, a mammoth spotlight on yourself, in reflecting on how, you know, the perpetrator has treated you, your family, you know, how you've managed to let them get away with it for so long, and all those little, you know, parts of yourself that you lose, you know, throughout that process, because, you know, you, your mum and your sister are just trying to get by, you're just trying to survive. And so for me, it didn't really matter how many times I shared my story, or how prepared I was going into, you know, interviews and speaking engagements, because I could never quite anticipate how an interview or a conference, you know, would trigger me. And I would be on the phone, you know, straight afterwards, booking in an appointment with my psychologist, you know, and seeing, you know, which of my friends were available, you know, for a glass of wine, because I needed to debrief and offload. But about, I think, 12 months into doing Voices for Change, it kind of dawned on me that, you know, feelings, they come and they go. And so for the first time in a very long time, I became okay with feeling temporarily uncomfortable. And so that's now filtered out to, I guess, other areas of my life, you know, where, you know, I no longer, you know, need to reach out, you know, for the chocolate bar or for the ice cream, you know, or for that glass of wine, because, you know, I've learned to, I guess, acknowledge, you know, all those feelings, you know, inside of me that I had neglected or pushed aside for so long. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time, I guess, over the past 3 decades, dimming my light to fit in. You know, I've spent a lot of it, you know, being, you know, voiceless. I guess, even as a child, you know, where I was so afraid to speak up. I was so afraid to speak up at home, because I would always get in trouble, or I'd be getting, you know, someone else in trouble. And so to that end, I am extremely grateful to have, you know, been able to walk alongside this journey. And I cannot thank Renata and the team at DV New South Wales enough for facilitating Voices for Change. You know, thank you for believing in the strength and the power of lived expertise. And to conclude, I guess I just want to stress that I think that we can have all the, you know, correct policies, frameworks, best practices, evidence-based approaches in place. And I think they're all really, really important. But I think that, you know, we are never going to know how successful or how effective the work that we do is, you know, until we bring in the lived expertise. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Synthia. Such a pleasure to hear from you, and I really appreciate you sharing so honestly how the journey has been for you. It's been a joy to work alongside you. So now I'd like to introduce Cherie, who's one of the 3 researchers who pulled together this report from all of the bits of evidence that we had collected along the way. And I'm so grateful to Cherie and the team. You've been fantastic to work with, and I'll hand over to Cherie to talk us through.
Thanks, Renata. Thank you so much. Could I also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and extend my respect to all First Nations people across the country today. And also, why did I have to follow Synthia and Jane? thank you both so much. Absolutely beautiful discussions of the work and Voices for Change as well. Thank you so much. And I feel really privileged and honoured to be part of this and even sitting in this space with you. So thank you for allowing that. So I'm here representing my amazing, incredible colleagues, Leticia, Funston and Corina Backhouse, who wrote the report. We wrote the report together. So I really think that today is a real celebration of the incredible strength and resilience and hard work and courage of the advocates. And I hope that the report reflects that. So we were approached by Renata last year to develop a piece of work that really highlighted all the incredible achievements of the Voices for Change project and also the profound impact that it has had in the space of media advocacy. So I just wanted to say sort of upfront that it's not an evaluation of the Voices for Change project, but rather it's a descriptive report that describes the impact and all the work that's been done in the space. What was really important to us, of course, was having the advocates central to the report. So the way we went about developing the report was we used, because of the time kind of constraints and resource constraints, and ethical considerations, we used source data that was already there, but we worked really, really closely with the advocates around how we use that. So we used the source data, which included things that that the project had already collected, and that includes survey responses, which had been completed by advocates and journalists and event coordinators, gathered some data from them. We used evaluation and project reports, feedback and testimonials from journalists and organisations, and descriptive detail about the public speaking engagements and the media reporting and other community advocacy opportunities. We also used the DVNSW project planning and management tools and some inquiry submissions and organisational reports. We developed that into some themes and developed a report structure using that. We then had some consultation sessions with the advocates where they gave us further feedback around whether they fitted, whether they agreed with them, how that kind of looked. Then we went away and developed the report a bit more, and we worked individually with each of the advocates on how their page will look. So you'll see in through the report, absolutely essential and critical to the report are each advocate's pages, where they have the most spectacular photo and a piece that they've contributed to the report. So we did that and developed the report, and then the final report was endorsed by each of the advocates. So that's where we kind of landed. I don't want to take up any more time, but just to give you a little overview of what the report looks like. If you've got it in front of you, you'll see section 1. It just provides detail on how we developed the report, so it goes into more detail about that source data and safety considerations and how the report was developed. Then we moved to section 2. Oh, thanks, Renata, that's great. We moved to section 2, which outlines the Voices for Change project in more detail, and it includes the key project achievements and the reach. Renata's going to be talking a little bit more about that. Then we moved into section 3, which really gives you kind of a bit of evidence on why accurate and sensitive reporting in the domestic and family violence space is critical, and sort of centres the Voices for Change program in the broader context around survivor advocacy programs. Then we move into section 4, which is the impact, best practice principles and key themes. And I know Talie's going to talk a little bit more about a couple of those coming up. And then section 5 is the recommendations and next steps. And I know Sina's going to be exploring that with you as well. Section 6 is really just sort of context and background, which provides further evidence and advice and support around the project and centres the Voices for Change project within that context. So that's the report in a nutshell. So thank you, Renata.
Thank you so much, Cherie, and I can't say thank you enough to the project team. You've been fantastic, and I really think the way that you've consulted with the advocates and really kept them front and foremost has been fantastic, and as ethical as you could be within the constraints of the funding that we had. So thank you so much. So I'm just going to run you guys through a little bit of the achievements that we had from this project. Let me see if I can share my screen again. Here we are. So we were really grateful to have had a variety of people who had participated in the project. Here we are. So we had 3 different cohorts, as Jane said. We had the first group in Sydney, we had a group in Illawarra, and we partnered with ACON to do the LGBTQ Voice for Change cohort. That wasn't within the scope of the Our Watch funding, so we were really grateful to Commonwealth Bank that we could open it up to include men, transgender men, and non-binary people in that cohort. So we had quite a lot of people who attended the training. Some people couldn't attend all of it. Some people chose not to complete, but we did have 18 people who completed it in the end. And that included a huge variety of people from different backgrounds and parts of their lifespan. Let me see if I can get to the next slide. So we did a vast array of media. In the end, we had about 56 media stories that were interviewed for and about 42 that were published. The KPIs from Our Watch were that in the first 9 months, we should do 2 stories. So we're pretty happy with what we got. When you consider that every single story required a huge amount of to and fro between journalists, checking in with the advocates. Sometimes some of the stories were for podcasts, so they're like up to an hour-long interviews. So for each of those stories, for each of those public speaking opportunities, there was a lot of work behind each of them for the advocates and also for myself as the project worker. So that gives you another overview of the type of advocacy that was undertaken. So we covered quite a lot of different types of media. Not just radio or print. Online media was the most popular, but we also did quite a lot of public speaking. And although it wasn't the prime focus of the project, there was also quite a bit of consultation with government and consultation within the DV sector, which was fantastic and led to some really important outcomes. Here's a little bit of journalist feedback. So I learned so much about writing responsibly about domestic and family violence, but also developed much more empathy for victims. It was amazing and engaged and informative process. Working with Voices for Change has made me a better journalist. Sorry, I didn't mean to move that. And what the advocate said was, in the whole, their experience was positive. And that on the whole, the journalists were respectful, which was fantastic to see. For the advocates, they felt like that the project made an impact and that it did improve the quality of reporting, which was fantastic to see. But there were some issues along the way. For example, there were quite a lot of journalists who didn't want to focus so much on the non-physical abuse. They wanted to hear about the dramatic stories, or they wanted the more violent parts of the story. So I think that's important to note. But you'll see within the report that the consultants did look at an analysis of the types of media that was undertaken, and that in the whole, the stories that were undertaken were consistent with principles of high quality media engagement, following the national media guidelines from Our Watch on good quality reporting for domestic and family violence stories. So that was really positive to hear. And I also wanted to mention, for anyone who's thinking of doing this in the future, some of the stresses, I guess, for advocates, such as stories not being published or stories being published with errors. And because there was a conduit through DV New South Wales, we were able to have a lot of those things remedied. But of course, that did have impacts on people who participated. Similarly, we had really positive feedback from event organisers. So advocates, survivors' voices are vital in creating real change in the domestic violence space. They're the only ones who know if support services and legislative changes are really working. And another person said, "Thank you for this program. It is always difficult to find people willing or prepared and supported to speak about their experiences. Yet we know personal stories have the most impact. The Voices for Change program made this possible. Thank you." So we had 28 public speaking opportunities, particularly within the 16 days that fell in the 18 months of the project. And it's impossible to know the reach of, you know, the hundreds and hundreds of people who attended those events. But most importantly, the feedback was positive from the advocates themselves. So you've been able to hear from 2 so far, and there'll be another 2 advocates speaking. But I wanted to share as well from people who are not here, including Catalina, who said the Voice of a Change program has helped me as a person. My self-esteem, my confidence as a human being, sharing my domestic and family violence experience. It has empowered not only me, but also my child who I advocate for. Thank you, Catalina. And also from Olive. I got a lot more confidence and empowerment that I gained from the whole experience. I really didn't know anyone who had experienced that kind of trauma. So Olive speaks about the importance of meeting other people and connecting, and that peer support that was formed through attending the groups. And so this is just a sort of overview of some of the knowledge and the skills that people learnt as being part of the program. I won't go through all of them now, but it's all within the report, and I really encourage you to look at. But I'd like to just emphasise that beyond the improved media reporting and the additional number of stories, there were also quite a lot of skills and knowledges that were built up in the people who participated. And certainly for me, as being part of the project, I've learnt an incredible amount, and I'm just so very grateful for everybody who's been part of it. So I want to say thank you so much. And then I'm going to stop sharing and pass the baton on to Talie.
Hello, thank you everyone. It's so great to be here, and I'm so grateful to our First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders for the use of their land. I want to say how privileged I am to speak at this event. I think it's we have incredible advocates, and any one of us could have spoken here today. I was really excited about being part of this program. I was already working in this space, and I was looking forward to being able to hone the skills I already had and expand the ones that I needed to develop into. And I wanted to bring the professionalism into the space of lived experience, because my experience of it was that we had an understanding of rolling somebody out as the lived experience person, patting them on the head and saying thanks. But this was a much more professional approach to that. And it highlighted our own abilities and our own experiences and the things that we were able to talk about and the things that we were able to share in a powerful and dramatic way, but also in a real and sustained way. And I think one of the things I found great is meeting with other advocates and connecting with them. And also one of the things I found hard was when we were triggered and that wasn't handled well. But what I found, when you have good leadership, it means that those people can be supported, can be encouraged, and things can be worked through. And so I'm really thankful for the leadership that we had that continued to work with all of us to bring us all forward. And I think that comes into the professionalism then of us being able to work in this space together collectively with diverse ideas and diverse pictures of what we've gone through. And I think the thing is, we've often wanted to have one picture of what an advocate looks like or what someone's going through with domestic and family violence. And it's not the picture, because it's a diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, diverse ways of speaking, diverse intersectionalities with what we're going through. And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind when we're presenting things. And we wanted the horror stories, and we were quite disturbed that the horror stories were what people wanted, because what was going to make change was people understanding what domestic and family violence looks like, what this experience is, and being able to bring it into a different space. The advocacy that we could do was really quite phenomenal, and the broad spectrum of experience that we could be involved in was really quite incredible. And I remember meeting with different groups and them saying to us, since we've met with you, we've changed the direction of what we're going to be doing, because we now understand what the issues are. And I think that is just so valuable to know that we could create a space where policies and decisions and processes could be challenged, but in a way that said, this is what the reality of those are. And I think this is why we need so much to have lived experience and lived expertise in this space, because we create things with well-meaning thoughts, but what the reality is something completely different. And so when we walk into a space, we bring our complete professionalism. This is our job. This is what we are hired to do. We are your colleagues. We're not the lived experience person who's going to be wheeled out for this situation. And I've really appreciated being able to work with so many different colleagues in so many different sectors within this sector. And it's been so powerful to bring that into this space and to even work with government and see some small changes. We're still hoping to gain more and maybe even create an advocacy space with government agencies so that we can keep bringing that voice into this space, because when truth and reality come in, that is when power will take over. It's a shared collective power, not one person rising to the top to stand on other people, but everyone standing on each other's shoulders to get to the point where we have a collective change and a powerful movement forward, because we have so much that we can offer. And as a collective space, we all can contribute our voices in such a phenomenal way. I think the other thing we forget is people who are in this space, in speaking in this space, they've had backgrounds before they came to this. They might be, like for myself, I was a professional musician running my own business, but suddenly I was just going to speak about my horror story. I think we need to create all of that into this space. Some of us were professionals before, some of us are professionals now and moved into different spaces. Some of us just feel like we can do our life as a partner or parent so much better because of what we're doing. And all of that is just so important and so valued. And I think when we take up the banner of we're going to make change for all of us, we take everyone with us. And that's what we want. If we try to do it by leading with strict rules or telling us how we want to do something, we're going to lose everyone. But if we take all of us together, we're going to change it with power and dignity. And the advocacy work that we can do is so powerful, and the alongsideness that we can bring to this space is incredible. It can create a whole change movement, and we need to grab hold of that. And I think what I want to leave you is with this image. So as my musical background, I'm going to leave you with a musical image. So I want to think about us all being notes on a page. We're creating together beautiful harmony, beautiful symphony. The sound is incredible. And what we're saying is, let's let lived expertise create the notes to create, sorry, I lost the word. Let's let lived expertise write the music, because that's where the profound song will be created. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Talie. I'm seeing some claps around the Zoom room, and I echo Sally's point in the chat that about goosebumps. Certainly had that from hearing you. It's so important to hear about your experience, and just lots of people also in the chat echoing the issue around professionalism. And we hope that through Voices for Change we were able to raise that bar, but there's still so much work to be done. And you will find in one of the appendices a pay schedule, which is maybe useful for your organisations if you are considering employing people with lived expertise. It's so important that people are considered colleagues, that they're at the same level, and that they are reimbursed financially for their participation. So I'm going to hand over to Sina, who's going to run us through some of the recommendations, and then there should be about 10 minutes at the end for questions.
Hi everyone. Renata, are you going to share the screen, or you want me to do it? All right. Well, hi everyone. My name is Sina. I go with he, him pronouns. Following up everyone before me, now it's like such a difficult job, because I'm speechless after what Talie spoke about. Kudos to you, like just gobsmacked. I want to start with acknowledging the traditional custodian owners of the land. I join you from the land of the Gadigal people. And I also want to acknowledge the lived experience of violence and the nature of this report that we're going to go through. I joined the program through the ACON cohort as part of the LGBTQ advocates. And it's interesting to share that when we first started, we were referring to ourselves as queer voices for change, not voices for change. And I personally was pretty much persistent on that, because for some reason I felt like, oh, how can we blend in? How can we all fight for the same thing after a while? And I don't know how it happened. I just can't remember the time through the history of things that suddenly we were just voices for change, regardless of gender, regardless of sexuality, regardless of background, immigration, language. And it was just fantastic. I've learned so much. I'm a different person than I was, and I see myself as one of my favorite drag stars, that every time that they're performing on the stage, I'm like, oh, they're better than the last time, they're better than the last time. I'm hoping that I am the same too. Obviously, there's a photo of me so that you see that I could get a haircut, but now because of the restrictions, I can't. So maybe moving on to the next slide and more serious stuff, please. Page 4 of this recommendation, you will find 12 recommendations for future survivor media advocacy, which I encourage you to look at. These include rolling out peer-led media advocacy projects, such as a First Nation cohort of Voices for Change advocates, developing a community of local, state, and national advocates to support advocates and building relationships in regional and remote areas to increase reporting in those areas that's clearly missing. The next slide. The report came up with 6 recommendations for how we can promote sustainable survivor advocacy in Australia, which you can find on page 5. I know many of you are attending the National Summit coming up early September, and I wanted to mention that these recommendations could be something to consider in your advocacy in general. On the next slide, we're going to go through these 6 recommendations, starting from day 3 of the training that we had at ACON building. Involve victim survivors in all aspects of initiatives to respond to and prevent sexual, domestic, and family violence in a safe and meaningful manner. Meaningful means that thoughts and perspectives are actually taken into consideration, not that they are an add-on at the end or ignored if they don't align with the project's plan. Hear them out. On the next slide, fund the federal rollout of survivor advocacy and media advocacy programs, such as Voices for Change, as part of primary prevention initiatives through the next national plan to reduce violence against women and their children. As you will have seen, projects like Voices for Change really upskill and support people with lived experience to safely advocate for change and have a louder voice. I am pretty much loud myself. Next slide, please. Implement a quarterly survivor advocate forum or advisory group based on the Victorian Victim Survivors Advisory Council model in state and territory. We believe that this will allow survivor advocates to provide lived expertise and consult on various government issues and policies. Again, this advice needs to be meaningful and funded. And I apologize that I'm reading this word by word. It's just because a lot of time and a lot of consultancy was put into it to come up with what it is. So I would really appreciate that you read it through and analyze word by word. Next slide, please. Ensure mandatory implementation of community consultation and survivor advocacy participation mechanism in all sexual, domestic, and family violence projects, policies, and services through the Next Nation plan to reduce violence against women and their children. So these consultations save time and money by ensuring that the projects have the contextual evidence which only survivor advocates can provide. And also don't take an advisor as a one-time to be used thing, because in my own personal perspective, I have been in many consultations, and due to the complex nature of DFE in different occasions, I unwrap different points of view of my own expertise every time that I was in a different setup of consultation. Next one, please. Adopt and expand the Victorian Client Voice Framework for Community Services as a national framework, including implementation of principles and guidance for appropriate remuneration of survivor advocates' work. If you haven't seen this framework, I am reliably informed by Rosie Batty that it is the best out there, and there needs to be across the board recognition that the work of people speaking from the perspective of lived experience are professionals too, and require adequate compensation as well. And the last slide is that to explore the efficacy and provide seed funding for a nation survivor media advocacy peak or representative industry body. And this report supports calls from other organization for a national representative body, which we believe would add support to the advocacy work and allow advocates to be more supported. And last but not least, thank you all for having me, and thank you for joining this event instead of going to the 11 a.m. news briefing. It's very heartwarming. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sina, and thank you for going through all the recommendations for us. I agree that it's important to go through them one by one and make sure that they get the care and consideration that they're due. So we have saved a little bit of time for questions, and if anyone would like to add those into the chat box, you'd be very welcome. I also know that there are a few people from the project who weren't able to be speakers just because we couldn't have everyone, unfortunately, but if you did want to say something short, you're welcome to. I guess I should kick things off with a quick question, and this one is for Sina. So one of the recommendations in the report is that we explore peer-led and area-specific projects into the future. For example, having a Aboriginal women's cohort, which would be led by Aboriginal women and includes Aboriginal women. Could you speak a little bit about how it was for you being part of the LGBTQ group, and whether or not that was important to have only people from that community presenting and as part of the group?
Yeah, I believe that. I think if it hadn't initiated as a group for LGBTQ people that I couldn't really relate to and rely on peer support, I wouldn't have started this journey. I feel like just hearing that my experience as a gay man, as a cisgender man, was also considered as important as other people. And the nature of what I had gone through was recognized, was very important and empowering. And the same goes with First Nation people and other marginalized communities that you can find. Like it's beyond just sexuality and gender and race. It's very complicated, but at the same time, people have to see that they're heard and they're respected and understood and appreciated to come forward and share their experience for the sake of making it a safer society for all of us. So that was my personal experience. If it was just like not targeting LGBTQ people, I may have never been here with you today.
Thank you so much. We don't have any questions yet, so I'm going to throw out another one. And this is for any of the advocates. Could you tell us a little bit about how you prepare for speaking opportunities? And I know within the group, we've talked about sort of doona days or having space afterwards, and how you can make sure that you're supported afterwards.
I'm happy to step in. Oh no, somebody else?
Go Talie.
So some of the things I do is make sure that I can talk to somebody afterwards, just to debrief. I try to get as much information before I speak, so I know what the goals are that I'm speaking into. And then I once a week have a doona day where I just have PJs and movies and fun things. And I try to break up the intensity of what I'm doing with having enough time of watching a funny show that I enjoy or something else.
Can I just add to that? I do exactly the same. But what was really good about what Renata did is she would approach the media and say, what do you want to know? So we would get something in the email and say, here are the 5 questions that they would like to approach you and talk to you about. So there's a chance to create good, strong key messages around that as it related to your experience. But I think what's important, which is what Talie mentioned, is that when you do that, you actually relive some of your own domestic violence. So it's really important to debrief and really important to, take that time out, because it sits in your cells. This whole trauma of your experience sits in your cells. And that process of yet sometimes I'll be talking to Renata 2 weeks after things have happened. I just had this moment, and and it was really important in this whole process, that debriefing and that availability of people within DV New South Wales, because it's not just Renata. There was Charlotte and Sharon. There's a few other people that we would talk to, but that process was really important.
Thanks so much, Jane and Talie. We've got a question here from Sienna. Thank you to all of the speakers. What would you like to build on for yourselves as you continue advocacy in the future? And what do you want to see for others with lived experience who may want to follow in your footsteps?
All right. Can I just mention, as I said earlier in my discussion, I created a group, or well, it was a group of us that got together and said, we want to talk about our experience. And leveraging off that, we then, if we're going to come together and create some like a Voices for Change, of which is my funding for at the moment, but if we tried to say, what are our key issues? And we created a group where we started talking about our experience. And for example, the people in the groups, we leveraged off the skills that we had. So I've got a background in change management and training, and there were others in the group that had background in business development, and other people that had a background in like a business processes. So we all pooled our knowledge, and then we came up with a plan of how to communicate some of the issues that were happening. My focus is family court, so there's some significant reform that needs to happen there, but because we combine all our knowledge and we pull all these people in, it allows us to leverage and create more change. So I guess getting back to that point of what do we do, it's like you get, I see some people here that we obviously talk on LinkedIn, and we've communicated, where we all pool our knowledge and we start leveraging and talking to the agencies such as, Mark Speakman's office within New South Wales, and then we go federally. And I think that when we can all work together, and then we can achieve more.
Thank you so much. Did you want to jump in?
For me or Jane? Oh, sorry. I thought you said somebody else. I didn't hear. Yeah, I was going to add to that. Like for myself personally, I think I want to see the space change. So I want to see it be more profoundly different in how we interact with each other and the voices that we use in the space. I loved working with groups like Sina's group, because it broadened my mind even more and helped me. And I think moving forward for all people, if we could create a space that was safe, that people had a chance to actually share their gifts and be empowered. And I guess what I really what I'm missing and want to see more of, and I think it started with some of the movements that are going on, is that real camaraderie and sisterhood and personhood that supports each other and brings each other forward into this space and encourages. I think so often we've been in spaces that are discouraging and quietening of voices. And I think if we can really release that so that we have this kind of shared experience of supporting each other and valuing what each person brings, I think that's a really vital move forward.
I'm just going to quickly jump in. I think I would like to see I'd like to see a much bigger movement, I guess, than what we have now. I know Black Lives Matters, it created, a bit of a stir. And I think it was the march even in Sydney back a few months back that created, created a bit of a stir amongst the community as well. But I'd love to see, advocates. I'd love to see, everyone collectively, and I think as Talie's mentioned today, but not just in New South Wales, in Australia as a whole, and then the rest of the world. The UN have this sustainability goal of achieving gender equality, by 2030, and at the rate at which we're going, it will take us another 156 years to kind of get there. But I think our power again comes from doing this together. However, that, you know, however we choose to do that, you know, whether it's by, you know, joining hands or, yeah, just throwing it out there.
Can I add one quick thing before we wrap up? Trigger warning, but I suggest that you watch Misrepresented. That's like a mini series on ABC. And these are women in political powers that it has taken them 60, 70 years in this journey to be finally given a platform to talk and say it out loud what they have experienced. And you can see that it's very much systematic. Yeah, it's regardless of gender, but it's gender-based sexual violence and domestic violence. And so just think about other marginalized communities like LGBTQ people. Empowers groups like Voices for Change so that it shouldn't take another 60 years for LGBTQ people to come and speak up. It shouldn't take another 100 years for Aboriginal people to come and speak up. So I think that's what I would like to see, you know.
Thank you so much. Such incredible wisdom from you all. We just had a question which was about whether or not the training changed between the different cohorts. So I'll just answer that really quickly and then we'll wrap up. So the training was a model which was given to us from Our Watch, but we did have flexibility to change it. So after the initial feedback from the folks who did the Sydney training, including Jane, Synthia and Talie, we did change it substantially. For example, we did the media training on the last day and the public speaking one on the second day to shift things a little bit. But we also adapted it for the people in the group. For example, we had some people with learning difficulties and visual impairments. So we had to change it quite a lot to make sure that it was really accessible and that we could talk things through rather than watching slides or reading things, which was not ideal for that group. And we found, you know, most adult learners learn better that way anyway, right? So we kept that throughout. And then for the last training, we had to modify it to make sure that all of the materials were inclusive for the LGBTQ cohort, which unfortunately Change the Story is not always the most inclusive, but we're very hopeful that Change the Story 2, which comes out later this year, will be more inclusive. But anyway, so much great learning with this report, and I really hope people can take the time to read through the whole thing. Lots of suggestions and information if people are doing this type of work, and really I want to say thank you to our speakers, but also to all of the advocates who are also in the room today and who have been part of this project. Your work is incredible. Thanks to Rosie, thanks to all the other advocates and people with lived expertise who are here today. It's been such an honour to work alongside all of you, and I'm really grateful for this work being in the public eye now. So take care, everyone. Have a good day, and thanks for being part of this today.